everybody. Welcome to another episode of Politically Depressed. As always, I'm your host, Eamon McAdam. I've got a small announcement to make before I start this episode proper, and it's a bit of an invitation. Once a week, every Sunday, I host something called the Palestine Watch Party, which is basically just an online screening with a discussion attached to it. This month we're watching 3 really excellent documentaries: Jenin, Children of Shatila, and My Neighborhood, which stars an 11-year-old Mohammed al-Kurd. I prioritize films by Palestinians and about Palestine, and the discussions that we've been having have been really fantastic. And so, if you like this podcast, you'll probably enjoy those discussions, and hopefully those films as well. And yeah, happens once a week on Sundays over Zoom. If you're interested, reach out either through Twitter or Instagram, or I guess through the app you're listening to this podcast on. I'd love to have you all there. And yeah, that's that. A Palestine watch party. Ugh. So today's another difficult topic. I mean, obviously, the podcast is called Politically Depressed. But I don't know, it's the same thing that I experienced last week, wherein I've recorded this 3 or 4 times and I get about 10 minutes in and I just completely lose steam. And for some reason I insist on starting from the beginning. It's kind of this feeling wherein it's still not natural. I do hope I get to the point where I can just sit and record and it'll take like an hour. But I guess my hesitation to even actually start is again another sign of avoidance. These are topics that are not easy to think about, let alone share. And I really hope that even though this episode will be more self-indulgent, you'll allow me to take the time. I mean, this whole podcast has been kind of self-indulgent, but I keep trying to hit that like thin line wherein it's still, relevant. I do believe that the personal is political, but I don't like involving myself too much. Navel-gazing is another term that I'm really afraid of being associated with. But yeah, basically I've been having issues with my partner, and for the sake of this story, my partner is white. They're Austrian, and obviously I'm here to share the kind of political themes that I've been reading into my recent troubles. The thing is I don't like myself these days, obviously. I'm useless. I'm crying half the time, or I'm kind of inert on the couch, playing the same stupid game over and over again, rewatching The Office again. I mean, I'm doing other stuff, but functionally there have been a lot of days where my partner comes home and I kind of still haven't gotten out of bed, functionally. And sometimes I'm kind of mute, I'm not really able to communicate. But a reason that I think exacerbates that is that I have been feeling more and more, and especially over the last 3 months, but obviously over the last few years, that we are increasingly inhabiting these split worlds. I described this in an earlier episode, that there really feels like different realities, that those of us who have experienced trauma and political violence and oppression and have left our homes, or now especially people who are facing genocide, but also just conflicts throughout the region and the global south in general. And so as someone who's in a relationship, who's in a loving relationship, a very intimate one, with someone who is still in that other world, which I read things materially, and it's not just a separate world. It is the same world, but that is a very privileged position, and it is one that is premised on power and violence, and is kind of, superimposed upon the other. That is to say, they're not actually separate, like one is premised on the other, in the way that, the global north can only exist with the global south. I'm going on another tangent. I think that's obviously a symptom of A, the avoidance, but B, the issues themselves, because it's very difficult to just get into the personal. When you're talking to your partner, it's not you're talking to a political subject. You're talking to someone who you want to keep close, and you want them to be aware of the things that they are doing, or that they might not even know that they're doing, but because they exist in these worlds that are so hegemonic, that they may not know that they're doing it. That there are these barriers that make it difficult to meet. And so this really came to a head. And the reason that I thought about making this episode to begin with is because a couple of weeks ago, I decided to ask my partner a question which I needed at the moment. I asked them to tell me that everything is going to be okay. And reflexively, they did. They said everything's going to be okay. But I felt nothing. And I said so. I said, I don't believe you. And there was a kind of silence because it was like, well, now what? I think the only person that I can believe for some reason when they say that is my mother. And I am someone who is very much so away from my mother. I miss her so much. It's been 2.5 years now, and I've only seen her, a few days. We talk often, but it's just not the same. And I really feel like I'm lacking that affirmation. I'm constantly really scared, and obviously things are scary for a lot of reasons. But for me, very specifically, I'm scared of how the society here is, and is transforming and is becoming and is exposing itself as. And I feel very alone because I don't have community here. And so the only community I do have is with my partner. So I need that feeling of being protected by them, in a society that is functionally theirs. But the reason that I can't feel satisfied with their answer, because I don't think they know. That I feel like an adult sometimes, and I don't want to feel like the adult in the room all the time, because I have no idea what the fuck's going on. And I don't even know how to control my own emotions, let alone control whatever's happening in the society that I don't know anything about, that I don't even speak their language. And so there's kind of that feeling that there are so many things that I know they don't know. And part of the reason why I know they don't know is because they're not freaking out all the time, I find myself sometimes literally saying, sometimes I feel like I want you to be more depressed. Because somehow they're functioning. And obviously, and we have this conversation a lot, that they are upset, but I don't feel it. Like another really big example that I've brought up to them several times, and it's really difficult to internalize because I feel really unfair when I say this. But, okay, I think I found a good way of phrasing it yesterday. Because yesterday, a similar thing happened wherein my partner came home and was just in a happy mood to see me, So it feels really, really fucked to be like, I can't handle your happiness because I'm so depressed and I'm so upset that you're happy, That I know your happiness is premised on an ignorance of my pain. And so I summed it up pretty well, I think. I told my partner, I need you to greet me. I need you to treat me as though I'm in mourning, because I am. I'm in mourning, I'm furious, I'm terrified. There's a lot of fucking shit going on, and it's not normal. And your insistence on making things normal is constantly clashing with my experience of reality, and it's like a constant gaslighting. It really reflects my experience of being here in Austria in general. Like every advertisement I see feels like a gaslight. Every time I go to the streets, every time I just hear white people laughing, it just feels like a gaslight, Like they're laughing, but in their laughter, it fucks with my understanding of reality, because my idea of reality is so premised on collapse. Which I know if I go to a therapist would tell me like, oh yeah, you're definitely traumatized. But like, fuck that. Because we're all going to become traumatized. And if you don't understand trauma as like an affect, as something that people live with, that people continue living with, that like politics is premised on trauma in so many cases, and increasingly with climate collapse, with, like understandings of colonialism and the reactions to colonialism, especially like authoritarian ones and I don't want to get into a whole historical analysis here. My point is just that, okay, one final example. And I feel unfair doing this whole episode. I've already obviously checked this with my partner, but I'm sure this is still going to be a bit like difficult. But I really can't emphasize this enough that I think this is a general problem. I don't think this is just something between me and them, but this is a problem with white people. And white people in relations with the rest of the world, Because I think the only people that won't benefit from hearing from this are white people that only hang out with other white people, And I don't know what to say to them, but, that's kind of a problem. We were out at dinner, and the same thoughts were kind of piling up in my head. I had went for a walk by myself earlier that day to kind of try and clear my head, but I guess it didn't, I didn't get the things out. I just kind of, I've really been in my head way too much these days. Like, even when I talk to people, I'm still in my head. But anyway, a big reason why I'm doing this episode is because even though I thought I'd kind of cleared things up with myself, on our way to dinner, I still found myself kind of lashing out. And I hate that. I hate lashing out. It feels cruel and immature and oftentimes unfair and unproductive, I don't want to hurt their feelings. But it's just a lashing out that comes from not being heard and not being understood. But I did lash out, and I felt really bad, and I had to analyze why that was. And then I think I came up with a question that did sum it up. What I asked my partner over dinner, at this very nice Persian restaurant actually, it's one that I discovered, it's run by these two old ladies. Love it, it's great, it's one of my only favorite restaurants in the city, which otherwise the food really sucks. Anyway, I do come up with a question, which is, how many times have you cried over the last 120 days? And they said none. And I said, that's exactly the problem. This is it. This isn't building up to something else, This is one of the worst things that can happen to a people, and to a people that are very close to my people, that are very close to the world. This is an indigenous people being massacred and genocided by a colonial army. Okay, I'm gonna slow myself down there because and it hasn't moved you. And my question that I always have for Europeans, particularly, white Europeans, is what will it take to move you? That's a really scary question. For me, the answer is very scary because we're ultimately finding that nothing is moving them. And at a time when we need internationalism, we need Europeans to wake up. These are people with immense power and privilege and are still living in some of the last remnants of democracy, And I think that's a really important thing, actually. It's that when I push on this point more, there's such a nullification, a self-nullification, because there's this feeling we can't do anything. And again, I think of what Moataz says, the Palestinian journalist, when he accuses people in the West of saying you are not free people. If you cannot stop this genocide, if you cannot even get your governments to do the bare minimum, you are not living in democracies. And I think a lot of people here are still living under the delusion that they are. And I think that's something big that this anti-right-wing march in Germany and here in Vienna kind of really exposed, which is the political impotence of the sort of average white European. even though they exist with such privilege, but they don't act on it. And a part of it is because, well, there are a lot of reasons, but a big part of it is they don't feel politics. I don't know, I very rarely have had discussions with people. Actually, here's a very funny story. I was in a call with a few friends, and one of them, this Armenian friend, said that they were describing Lord of the Rings to their mother, and their mother was like, "Whoa, those dwarves, are they Armenian?" And she's like, "Wait, what?" And it's like, "Oh, these, really angry people who are super upset that their mountain was stolen from them. They sound like Armenians." And it was funny. And then I said, because I don't know much about Lord of the Rings lore, I asked, wait, who stole the mountain from them? And she said the elves, but then someone else said Smaug. And then they started arguing. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. I think I felt for the very first time something, which is what I imagine people feel like when other people talk politics. Because I don't care if it's the elves or Smaug. I didn't even know there was a conflict. I'm only just coming to this conversation now, and I already don't care. Like, you're getting way too invested in this. I found that really funny, because it was the very first time I'd ever experienced something similar to, like, yeah, what I imagine white Europeans feel like when they talk about Palestine, where it's like, yeah, well, they say this, you say this, whatever, can't you just get along? Like, can't you just agree? Like, it's just a disagreement. I think this returns to the very premise, the thesis of this podcast, which is, I do think we need to start reckoning with feeling politics. I think once you cry over Palestine and not just, I don't know, shake your head in disagreement or go yell at someone, once you feel the grief, once you sort of, you are sort of pushing yourself out of that comfort zone, which is the hegemony of white supremacy and patriarchy. You are feeling for a second what people have been feeling for decades. But you also start to see things differently, and your priorities shift. And I think, another thing that my partner says often, which is, what can I do? Or rather, what can I do? And it's sort of a rhetorical question, because it's the beginning and the end. And so I pushed them and I said, so what can you do? If you were to really feel and internalize the pain that I've been trying to share with you, instead of rejecting it, I think it wouldn't be a rhetorical question anymore. You would generally be asking, what can I do? Because ultimately, with the rise of right-wing fascism in Europe, if the bulk of people don't wake up, don't enliven themselves, the right are organizing. God, I don't want to go into a circle again. Y'all know, because y'all been listening to this podcast, and it's just, I really think, unless we want to continue, and here when I say we, I'm talking in a very weird way, because I'm sort of putting myself in the shoes of the white European, in this kind of way of constantly doing the work that honestly I don't think should be put onto my back, should not be put on the back of the person who is, you know what I mean? This is the kind of unfairness of these things, that it is the marginalized who has to come up with the theory, not those that are benefiting and comfortable with their marginalization. I'm not saying I'm marginalized, but you understand what I'm saying. I don't want to play victim here, but, compared to the white European, I'm not doing so hot. But so, if we want to break out of this incredibly polarized, and I mean emotionally polarized, I just can't meet, I can't hang out with people, I can't be in the same space with white people because their laughter irritates me. I think we have to start feeling these politics. I think white people really need to start really working to break the numbness that is global capitalism of the 21st century, of Instagram, of the algorithms, but also break from white supremacy, to recognize Palestinian pain as real, Palestinian blood as real, and Armenian pain as real, and Sudanese pain, but also not just fall to despair, or not just get stuck in asking, what can I do, what can I do, what can I do? Really just spend time with it, and think about what can you do, and connect the dots, and just listen. There's so many resources out there about what you can do. And some of it is like starting from home, you know? Like, it's a scary fact that white Europeans cannot influence their governments, that people in the US are being led by a stupidly unpopular president who is basically dying. And the alternative to that morbidly reactionary, genocidal president is another morbidly reactionary, genocidal president. I don't know. We're living in incredibly scary times, and I'm not so much worried about the right-wing nutjobs as I am about the masses of just white centrists, of the so-called apolitical people, for whom they will be the last to see the terror and the horror. But I think it's coming for everybody. And yeah, again, I feel like I'm going to end a lot of my episodes like this, but we're all fucking doomed unless something changes. And so, yeah, always end on a high note. So yeah, that's been another episode of Politically Depressed. As always, I've been your host, Damon McAdam. If you like this podcast, please consider leaving a 5-star rating or a review on whatever podcast app you're listening to this episode on. And if you really like this episode, head over to patreon.com/FireTheseTimes. The Fire These Times is a media ecosystem based in the periphery that supports this project alongside a bunch of other media projects. And for $5 a month, you can really help this project grow. And that's been it for me. I'll see you all next week.